The public has a long-held fascination with detectives. Detectives see a side of life the average person is never exposed to. In this podcast series, I Catch Killers with Gary Jubilant, I'll be interviewing a whole range of people you come across as a detective, including police, bad guys and victims. I spent 34 years as a cop. For 25 of those years I was catching killers. That's what I did for a living. I was a homicide detective. I'm no longer just interviewing bad guys. Instead, I'm taking the public into the world in which I operated. The guests I selected have amazing stories from all sides of the law. The interviews are raw and honest, just like the world they inhabited. No one who steps into the world of crime comes out unchanged. Join me now while I take you into this world. This episode of I Catch Killers contains conversations that some listeners may find confronting or triggering. Discretion is advised. Welcome to another episode of I Catch Killers, and once again we're in for a treat. Police forces, by their very nature, tend to attract people who conform to a very rigid stereotype. Most times you can spot a cop a mile away. But just occasionally, police forces accept and embrace individuals who dance to their own beat. If you picture the type of cop heading a squad, taking on bikies or notorious Middle Eastern crime gangs, it's not likely you picture that officer getting around in stilettos and pink suits. But that's exactly what today's guest did, and might I say, did it very successfully. Today's guest is retired Detective Superintendent Deborah Wallace. Hey Deb, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Hi Gaz, thanks for having me.
How's our life outside the police?
I've taken to it like a duck to water. Way too easy.
You look very relaxed.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for your service with the police. How long were you in the police for?
Just short of 37 years.
It's a long time, isn't it?
It is a long time.
It's a big part of your life. I've been researching and also reading your books. A very interesting read, A Woman of Force, and you have done a lot in the police in your time in the police. Did you think when you started out in the police that your career would go the way it's gone?
Not at all. I when I first joined, I just wanted to be in the uniform for the rest of my life because it's such a great experience back in those early days.
Yeah.
And then my role models were sergeants, so I aspired to be a sergeant. And I would have been as happy as Larry doing that, and then the rest to me was just a bonus.
That's where you were aiming for.
Yeah.
Why did you join the police? Because you joined in 83?
That's right.
So
yeah.
It wasn't sort of the career path that was often thought of with women in the police?
No, we come from a very working class family in the western suburbs. We lived at Westmead, and my dad, after I left school, because I didn't know what I was going to do, I actually wanted to be a travel agent.
Yeah.
But I knew there was a struggle there because Dad had the view that I needed to work for a government to be secure for the rest of my life.
He wanted a government job.
Yeah. And so he was a locksmith for Prospect County Council, which is an electrical company. And he got home, he was sitting, he was proud as punch. He said, well, what are you going to do now that you finished school? And I said, well, Dad, it's my first day, give me a break. And he said, well, I've got you a job and you're going to be a clerk typist at Prospect County Council. And you know what they say? It's a government job, it's secure, and you can be there for life. And you're starting Monday.
Okay.
So that's where I went for 3 years and enjoyed my time there, but I just knew I didn't want to stay there all my life and I wanted a career.
And was there a pivotal moment that you thought policing?
No. Yes, only to the point of accident that I opened the paper one day and I saw an ad for the New South Wales Police Force looking for recruits, but in particular for females. And it wasn't many years before that women were being brought in to do frontline work.
Right.
I knew policewomen from the old school. My sister's girlfriend, my sister's 10 years older than me, was old school, school lecturing and all of that sort of stuff. That didn't really attract me, but when I saw that they could now join Frontline and it's a government job, it's secure, I thought, well, ticks the boxes.
Ticks the boxes. There weren't many police women about in those days, were there?
No, there was. We were still transitioning really from the police women before to that front line. So we were sort of a fairly minority, and I think a bit of a shock to the blokes. I think when I got to Blacktown Mount Druitt, which is the first station, was, well, now what do we do with them? So,
okay, you've got them in the police. Now, you did the academy at Redfern. That would have been Redfern times?
Yes, one of the last classes.
And they were pretty hard physically?
Yeah, it was a baptism of fire for someone who was non-physical and had spent her whole life doing physical culture and didn't do a day's fitness in her life.
And anyone that talks about time in Redfern Police Academy talk about Breakfast Hill. Do you want to describe that?
Yeah, it was a place of torture where they would take you to this 3-tiered hill and they would get us into groups of 10 because our classes were 30 each. And we'd have to link arms, and the girls were in the middle, thankfully, because I think we got a bit of a leg up there. And you'd run to the first tier, you'd get down and you'd do push-ups, then you run to the next tier and you do burpees, and then you run to the top and then you run down and you do all that until you've finished. And the reason it was called Breakfast Hill is that our gym instructor, Brian Chickamore...
he was a bit of a hard ass.
He was. The idea was that you don't stop until the last person's thrown up their breakfast. So that was why it was called Breakfast Hill.
Okay. Great career choice there, Deb.
Yeah, that's right.
So your first station was Blacktown?
Yeah.
And Blacktown in the 80s, it would have been fairly... rough and ready?
Yeah, it was. And in fact, in those days, there were two stations were joined together, which was that's why I say Blacktown Mount Druitt. Mount Druitt was actually a substation of Blacktown, Blacktown being the head station. So we would come on shift and could work at either of those stations. But it was the Wild West in those days.
And you worked the truck?
Yeah, in those days we had the old F100s, so worked the trucks and not for a little while because we had two trucks on shift and a car. So they were 27 was our area and they were numbered 1, 2 and 3 accordingly. 2 trucks and 1 car. The car was always manned by the sergeant and he worked with either the female or the most junior officer. So for the first 6 months, I think they thought they're safely tucked away working with the sergeant because as we know, sergeants being smart don't get to jobs
not
first.
The first off at the ball.
Yeah, so I did a lot of watching and catching up, I suppose, and it wasn't until probably about 3 or 4 months in that I got to work the truck.
There's an incident that you refer to in your book where you attended a brawl. I think it was one of those type of brawls that any uniformed police officer gets pretty used to when the pub's shut and someone doesn't want to leave and the car park turns into a bit of a melee. And you turned up and I think you had a fairly tough guy sergeant working and wondering what he was going to do with the new female recruit. And he got out ready to fight and you got out and... walked over there, and then what happened?
Well, you're right. Senior Constable Paul Garner was a legend at Blacktown. He was tough. He looked tough. He was, just chiselled out of concrete. He was a concreter, actually. He did mostly permanent night work.
I've never seen a weak-looking concreter.
That's right. And he was, over 6 foot, and he had a big, strong jaw. And I think he was a bit shocked this night on a Friday night to be working with me because I was supposed to be on 27-3 with the sergeant.
Yeah.
But it was that night the sergeant made the decision that it was time for us girls to get out. So I think it was a bit of a payback to Paul. And there we were on 27-1, the flagship, and a call went over to the brawl at the Stockade Hotel. And no cars were available to assist. And all the way there he's looking at me going, we're dead. We're dead. We're going to be killed.
Saying that to you.
Yeah, and my confidence was rising, as you can imagine, and just kept looking at me going, we're dead. We're dead. And because in those days women weren't allowed to wear slacks, we had to wear these things called culottes, which are long shorts. And we pulled up and there's about 30 blokes punching on outside. It was a Stockade at Layla Park. You're right, 11 o'clock closing time. And Paul looked at them and then looked at me and said, yep, we're dead. So he said, let's go. He used to call me DB. He said, all right, DB, let's go. Now, I was so nervous with these culottes, and the F100s were quite high, that I thought I'm going to fall flat on my face if my culotte gets hooked up on the handbrake or the radio. So I'm going to hoik up my culottes and make a clean landing. So up I hoiked my culottes up and I clean land. Well, as I landed, because I've got my culottes hoiked up, men mid-punch turned and just looked at us. And just it was like a Dick Tracy moment, like, what the hell's that? And they said, hang on. Hello, Paul. They all, senior. And they looked at me and said, who's that? And he just shaking his head thinking, at this stage no one's fighting. They're just silent and looking at me. And I said, in a very, I'm a new police officer. And they said, but you're a chick. And I said, yeah. And they said, like, have you got gun and stuff? I said, yeah, I've got a gun and stuff. They said, wow, that's really cool. So, love, what do you actually want us to do? And I said, I'd like you all to leave quietly. And they went, love, we will tonight because that is a lovely way to ask. He said, Paul usually gets out swinging the nightstick, but you just got out and said, please. So you know what? We're leaving. And they did. Well, we got back in the truck and Paul looked at me and just said, DB, I said, yes. He said, you and me every Friday night. And so we were for the next 3 years.
So you had those superpowers, superpowers
those culottes, they worked.
The tough guy male cops never understood.
So when they started bringing in slacks, I said, no, I think I'll still stick to culottes.
But it is hard. It does diffuse, and that's why it's been good that females are in the police and part of the police, and it's not looked at anything unusual whatsoever these days. But for different situations, you get the males there and testosterone's running high, and the female can actually diffuse simply by turning up and being a female. Did you find that?
I did, and I remember being taught that. Everything I've acquired, I've been taught or seen or observed or, listened to or people have given me advice. And I remember going to my very first really violent domestic. It was out at Mount Druitt. And we could hear the noise going on inside, and I'm with a senior constable, highly experienced. And as we walked to the front door thinking, there's just the two of us here, we haven't got backup yet, but it's commotion going on. And the guys opened the door, really aggressive. And the senior constable, I'm thinking, we're going to have to go in here. And he just went, so what's going on? He barely above a whisper.
Yeah.
And I thought, what's going on? And the guy answering the door, who previously had been very aggressive, opened the door, just went, oh, where are you from? And he dropped his voice.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to be aggressive when the two of you are whispering.
Yes.
And certainly we then got entry, we calmed things down, and I learnt that you're 100% right, that sometimes there's a time to be assertive and there's other times just to take a step back.
And you do actually see police that go through their whole career and not learn that. And they tend to be the ones that, they've been assaulted again. And you look, and not all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes, even if the best skills and vocal skills to try and de-escalate don't work. But it's amazing what can happen if you do take the sting out of things.
Well, I remember a question was always asked, and I was again with an amazing senior constable and asked the question by someone who probably wasn't as positive about us joining, and said, you know what, why would we take them, the old question, why would we take these women to a brawl? They weren't. And this senior who'd been training me, who was amazing, he just looked at this guy and said, well, Deb's got two weapons that they don't give us.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking,
Where
do they? Where are they?
Where are
and the guy said, oh, like what? And he said, they have given her a brain and a mouth. She can think and talk herself out of situations.
Yeah, okay. Well,
I thought that was nice.
Yeah, that is a skill that's brought there. So you enjoyed your time in uniform?
Loved it. And that's where I made the decision with those guys, mainly all guys, and of course the women we had, that if I could just finish my career and stay on this truck with these men and women at Blacktown, Mount Druitt, I'd be happy.
Yeah. And do you have, I look back at the career and look at policing, and we branched off into different areas, major crime and whatnot, but I've got the utmost respect for the guys and girls that stay in general duties at the frontline policing their whole career.
Absolutely.
Like every shift they turn up, they have no idea what they're going to be confronted with.
Yeah, they don't have time to think sometimes, and it's on the run, and they're call after call, handing over to the shift. I take my hat off to them.
Yeah. How do you feel like being a frontline police officer these days in your observations?
I don't envy them because everyone's got, and it's always taken out of context, and I think social media, and whenever a policeman interacts or a policewoman interacts with somebody, the phones are out and they're capturing, and I think I've had that experience with some of my staff, that what's uploaded is a tiny bit of that. I think body cameras are fantastic as long as the footage is given in context. But unfortunately, social media sometimes choose to edit fairly hard what actually occurred, and I think that is really damaging and probably off-putting to the young police to second-guess themselves. And I worry that they should never second-guess themselves. I know the police force hopefully will back them on that, but if they second-guess themselves in a volatile situation, it could be a matter of life and death.
It could be fatal or just serious, but not quite as serious. But you're quite right, the pressure they got. Because I always, when I was in uniform, you make a mistake and the sergeant would pull you aside and say, hey, that's not how we do things around here, all that. But the police today must have a fear of they make a mistake, they're going to be on the front page or social media, which is probably worse to them these days, and humiliated that way. They are under a lot of pressure.
Absolutely. And the attention to detail, like our laws these days, for every law that we get, which is fantastic, there's a whole lot of policy and stuff behind that. They have to be aware of every detail because they know when they get in the witness box, it's not just how did you do the job that day, it's what policy did you rely on, what power did you have. And I take my hat off to
it's
there.
It's a bit scary, isn't it?
It is. I mean,
really?
we had, powers of arrest, and we learned them by heart, so we knew them, but they were like 4 powers of arrest.
Today, it was pretty basic, and you could, under pressure, still remember what your powers of arrest are. But it has got more complicated. Now, you made a strike for females in the police very early in your career. When we join the police, we all get a registered number, which is just a number that you carry for the rest of your career. But when you joined, you had your number and the letter F behind it.
Yeah, at the end of a paperwork or report, you have to do as typical. We were taught, you write your name. So in my case, Debbie Wallace. You write your rank, probationary constable. You write your registered number. Mine was 20854. And then we were told you had to put in brackets afterwards, capital F, then our station and our date. And that was just what we were taught. So for months I did that. And then I started to think about it. I thought, I'm looking at the guys' reports and I'm thinking they're not putting M after their name. So I'm wondering what this is about. So I thought maybe it's just something that's no one's challenged and maybe maybe we don't even need to do it. It's just something old school that's just been gone on. So I thought I'll just do my reports and not put it on. And, of course, when you do your reports in those days, it went to the Crown Sergeant's office. We don't have Crown Sergeants now, but they were a breed unto themselves.
They were scary.
They were scary. They were. I always draw the analogy, and I have many of them who I still keep in contact. They all look the same. They were old, fat, cranky, and snarled at you.
That was a Crown Sergeant. I think that was the prerequisite.
And so we put our reports up, and yes, they'd come back with spelling mistakes and grammar and a big red pen and resubmit, and so I'd do that, and so it went on, and then I got it back a clean report, all fixed, except this big red F where I'd left it off. So I did it one more time, didn't correct it, did the report and didn't put the F, and then I get a call. Probationary Constable Wallace, attend the sergeant's office immediately. I thought, this is trouble, because when you get called up there, you're in trouble. So I've turned up and I've stood to attention. He's at his desk and he threw the report at me and said, "What sort of an idiot are you?" And I said, "Probably the average idiot, Sarge."
Good idiot.
He said, "How many times do I have to send this back to you? And you have continually left the F off."
Yeah.
Well, I started to sort of laugh. And he says, what explanation have you got for that? And I thought his head was about to explode at this stage. And I said, "Well, Sarge, do you mind me if I ask something?" And he said, "No, do your bit." And I said, "Well, as you know, my name's Debbie Wallace." He said, "Yes, brain surgeon. Yes, I've got that." And I said, "And I'm a female." He said, "I've worked that out." I said, "Well, if there's another Debbie Wallace in the station who happens to be a male, I'm happy to put F so you can tell us apart."
It's a reasonable, logical argument.
So he started to, his moustache started to quiver. He went red, but he started to laugh. And then he just said, "Get out of my office." Now, it was about a few months later that a memo came out that women could now leave the F off. So I think maybe that sergeant took it up for me.
That's where you struck the blow for women in the police.
Small wins.
Small wins, just little incremental steps. That's very good. How long did you spend in general duties?
3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
All around Blacktown?
All Blacktown, Mount Druitt.
Yeah. And that would have been domestics and assaults and...
Yeah, a lot of armed robberies in those days. And a lot of break and enters because, in those days, the standard armed robber was service station, liquor shop and, balaclava, sawn-off shotgun.
Money for their heroin.
Yeah.
The armed hold-ups and all that. It was just a cycle, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard to think now when you look back at how many stick-ups there were.
Yeah.
Every LAC had them, or patrol or division as we called them in those days.
Yeah.
Now, the reason you found your way into plain clothes, and you've already said that that was nothing that you aspired to, but it was a tragedy that I think's left an indelible impression on your not only your career but your personal life as well, and that was the murder or the abduction, rape, and murder of Anita Cobby.
Yeah, that's correct. That was the 2nd of February that she was killed in that paddock out there, and that did change, like you're right, personally and professionally for the rest of my career.
And I think a lot of people would be aware of it. It was a young, she's 26 years old, walking home from Blacktown railway station. She was a nurse, and she was abducted and raped and had her throat cut.
That's right.
And it certainly got a lot of attention by the media, but people were horrified by it. It sort of shocked the whole city. Your involvement, as I understand, and part of the investigation was a reconstruction, which is fairly typical with homicide investigations and the nature of that crime. Do you want to talk us through that? Yeah,
it was, and I've the man in charge of that case, because I was a young uniform cop at Blacktown at the time. But she was killed, and the man in charge of that case, from a local perspective, was Graham Rosetta, Sergeant Graham Rosetta, and he was an icon I was awestruck by his presence. And
I haven't worked with him, but I've heard his name mentioned in those terms.
He reminded me a bit like, not looking Columbo, but his demeanour. But he was tough. He always had his tie half undone. He had this shock of black hair. He had a death stare, and he didn't smile a lot. And
that's a good trait of a detective.
Yeah, that's right. He just looked typical. Yeah. And as you know, Gaz, more than anyone, is that most murders are committed by those known to the victim.
Yes.
And they're the ones that, the clear line of inquiry eventually. And Graham had said to me that it's the really random ones are really difficult ones. And the information sought is out there in the community. After about 2 days, Graham had nowhere to go with this. And the media, understandably, was starting to say, look, we can't keep this on the front pages for much longer, although the outrage. So we were going to start to withdraw, and Graham got really worried about that because he knew that information he needed. So I was entering the switchboard, and he was walking out the back, and he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Wallace, how old are you?" And I said, 25, Sergeant. And he said, "How tall are you?" And I said, 5'8". He said, "I think that'll work. Come with me." And he took me up to the detective's office, and they gathered around, and he said, "Look, we need to keep this in the front pages as long as we can. I need to get as much information that's out there." So for a couple of reasons, we're going to do this reenactment. And the first reason is we're going to let the media come on the journey with us. And also...
And just to explain that, because Anita came from the city.
Yeah, she got on
the train.
Yeah, she'd been out for dinner after her shift on a Sunday with her girlfriends during the day, and then went for dinner at night at Chinatown, and then was catching the train back to Blacktown.
Right.
And then normally she'd either catch a taxi or ring her dad to pick her up. And on this night, the phone box was broken and there was a big long line in the taxi rank, so she decided to walk, which was not that far. It was probably about 2 kilometres to their home. And so at that point, Graham needed to do the gimmick thing to see if someone would recognise, even though we knew it was a Sunday, the commuters would be not regulars, but also importantly, he'd had witnesses who'd heard a scream or seen a car.
Do a reconstruct.
And just see if the timings were right.
Yeah.
We were actually, the timings were out when I did the walk, and that threw them into a little bit of a panic. But then the girlfriends came back and said, actually, we were wrong in our statements. This is the time she actually left us and she would have caught the train, and then it was perfect.
Right.
So after I did the reenactment...
And in the reenactment, you had to dress with the same clothes?
Similar. The girlfriends took me out for dinner.
Right.
And didn't take me for dinner, but took me out to Westfield, and they knew what she'd been wearing. And so we bought clothes, which was a pair of pinks in those days in the 80s. It's a pair of ski pants. Girls would know what I'm talking about, with a sort of a stretch sort of ski pant with a little piece of elastic under the foot, a pair of ballet flat shoes, and a white T-shirt.
Right.
And a handbag. So they, as much as we could get close to what they believed she was wearing, I mean, they were with her a few hours before. So after we did the reenactment, and after that I was in the car park back at Blacktown, just with Graham and I, the media had all gone, and he just looked at me, it was about 9:30, and he said to me, very serious, "How would you like to be a detective?" Right. Now, I just looked back at him and said, "Gee, I must have walked good on that train." Now he sort of looked at me like, "What?" And then he said, no, he didn't know whether I would ever fit in, but I think what he was just doing is thanking me in a way to say, "Would you like to be part of the team?"
We'd talk about it, but walking in the footsteps of a girl in such a tragic set of circumstances, did that stay with you, the thought, or when you were actually doing it? Because it's something, it was an area that not dissimilar to where you grew up, and you're around the same age, and did it affect you?
How it hit me, I guess, was all up leading up to it, like on the train, because we had the media with us, and then at the point came, Graham said to the media, "Now you can't be part of this now. We need to do police work." And Graham said, "I want you to keep walking the route, and we're going to stay back. We're going to hang back, and we're just going to watch. We just want to get a feel for this." So he and the team, his detectives, stayed back. He said, "When you get to this point, I want you to stop. I just want you to stop and just stand there." And the reason was that was the witness had heard a scream or seen a car. And while I was standing there, while they were no doubt, comparing their notes and writing notes, a car came down the opposite direction, which we believe is what the killers had came down, and just kept going. They didn't do a U-turn like they did. But as the car passed me, because it was so quiet, really eerily quiet, and the lighting would have been exactly the same, I remember thinking, that car would have passed her, she would have thought nothing of it. A few moments later, that car would have pulled up. She maybe thought, was it asking directions? Yeah. And however, when the door opened, in a few short hours, her life would be over.
And that's when the nightmare began.
And the terror. I thought to myself, like you said, a beauty queen, local girl, nurse, lovely family, just typical, like wrong place, wrong time, and her life was over.
Yeah. It's horrific just thinking about it, but putting yourself in that position, I can imagine that you would reflect on it. But not that any good can come from this, but you formed a relationship with Gary and Grace Lynch, her parents. How did that evolve?
It was a bit strange because I'd been doing the senior detectives course, and I knew that the Gary and Grace and the Simpsons, Christine and Peter, became the founding members of the Homicide Victim Support Group, which is a wonderful legacy way beyond their years. And they used to come down to the academy and lecture detectives on the impact of this sort of crime on victims. And I remember sitting there, and someone had said to me, the Lynches are coming down today. And I think Martha, who's the quarter, might have been there. Martha Jabor. Yep. And it was sort of said to me, look, Grace did have a little bit of a problem with the way she was sort of depicted in the reenactment, because she just felt the ski pants on. And I was, and I know Grace didn't care, but I was just a bit embarrassed, and I thought I don't want to make her feel uncomfortable. So I stayed quite in the background and didn't really go up to them or anything at the time. They were amazing what they discussed, their bravery. And it wasn't until 2010 I think it was 2000, they decided to do a powerhouse museum. The Kashula Powerhouse Museum wanted to do a exhibition on the impact of crime it was supposed to be on victims, but Gary and Grace had said, no, crime impacts the families of the offenders as well. So it was this, they were preparing this. They set up a curatorium, which is a group of people to quality control the exhibition. So it's tasteful, because it was based on Anita. It was called Anita and Beyond. So I suddenly got a phone call to say, would I be part of this? And I thought, I don't know, like time's passed. And so I was bitten. They said, Gary and Grace have asked you to. And I thought, that's a bit unusual. But of course, if they've said it's okay. So I've turned up at the Kashula Powerhouse Museum for the first meeting. Bit nervous. They were all gathered there, the director of art and this big group, the board. And I've walked to the door and I didn't know what to do, and I hesitated. Well, they all heads turned, and Gary got up and he walked to me and took my hand and said, Deb, it's been way too long. We've missed you. Come and sit with Grace and I. And then they pulled up a seat right between them, and they held my hand the whole meeting.
Wow.
So from then on, we became firm friends.
I can see how that bond would form from there. They were exceptional people, weren't they?
Exceptional, and I'm so honoured that they were part of my life.
Just the graciousness that they displayed, and the whole way they conducted themselves on what they'd been through, it was just amazing. Brave.
There's no, and the humanity they showed, and the humility through all of that. I mean, I think we all compare them to our own parents in a way. Like Grace never missed a day of court, and through some of that most horrific stuff. Even when we were doing the exhibition, they played footage of the, I think it was the ABC, and they even had the aerial shot of her in the paddock, and we could hear the artists who were trying to get her breaking down and sobbing. And I was with Gary and Grace. We're out now it was out at Lewis Gallery at Emu Plains, a beautiful gallery. And Gary said to me, Grace, you take one side of the room and I'll take the other, and we'll calm them down. And I heard Gary and Grace both then saying to them, don't be upset. There's nothing from that can be any more hurtful than what we've lived through. So let's just do this.
Yeah, it's an interesting way how they deal with such tragic circumstances. So I take it you've said yes with the invitation to go into plain clothes.
Yes.
And that's changed your life to a huge degree. So where did you start your plain clothes?
I was what we call, so I suppose a detective in training is called A-list, and it was at Blacktown. I did all of it there, and I became designated at Blacktown. Yes. So 3 years training. Yep. Stayed there the whole time, and until I moved on to my next station, which was a bit of a baptism of fire again, which was to Cabramatta.
Cabramatta. I've looked at your career, and you have attracted, or you just happened to be the person in positions at some very significant times. But Cabramatta. So we're looking at the late 80s?
1991.
Okay. Can you describe Cabramatta to those that mightn't be aware? I'm fully aware of what went on.
Yeah, look, and I'll set it. I'll give you an anecdote of how because being a Western Suburbs girl, born and bred at Westmead, gone to Blacktown, Mount Druitt, everything was pretty normal. It was interesting because the crooks knew their role, the cops knew their role. I had this theory that for some reason everyone we locked up was called Wayne. I apologise to anyone that's called Wayne. And I used to have this theory that if people stopped christening their kids Wayne, we would have got the crime rate by about 80%.
I'm not sure if they've studied that at university, but they should probably have a look at it.
And when I get to Cabra-matta, and for those who may not know, it's an amazing place, even today, and it has a heartbeat. But way back then, Cabra-matta tends to take on the face of the immigration policy of the day. And I think that's because of its proximity to Villawood. So people come into the detention centres, then gradually integrate into the community.
That makes sense.
And so it's gone through a whole lot of cultural changes. But of course, in that era, it was from Southeast Asia, particularly refugees from South Vietnam. Cambodia and Laos to a certain extent, but mainly overwhelmingly South Vietnam, out of prison camps. And so when I get there, I remember turning up on my very first day because they didn't actually have many detectives there, and it was an old boss from Blacktown called Alan Leake was now in charge of Cabramatta. And he was wanting to set up because Cabramatta used to be a substation of Fairfield, and they were breaking apart. So he wanted to set up his own detectives. So we had some detectives, but wanted to add more. So he rang me and said, I've got this great detective sergeant called Cole Hilson who's running the team here. I think you're going to love him. Why don't you come over? Yep. And I went, well, it's still the western suburbs. I could do the trip over there. And I remember getting there my first day, and they said, I'm looking around, they're telling me about, you'll love it here. We have murder, mayhem, we've got it all, gangs and shootings and murder, everything a detective would want.
A young detective, yep.
So I said, all right, so this young detective, interestingly enough, said, we'll take you up the street, because a lot of the young trainee detectives were beat cops, so they knew the street left and the gangsters. So we said, come on, I'm going to take you up. I'm going to show you where all the murders happen. I'm going to take you to the restaurants that have been extorted. I'm going to take you to the pool halls. I'm going to show you where the gangsters hang out. And I'm saying, okay, let's go. Let's get the car. And he went, oh, no, you don't need a car. And I said, why don't we need a car? And he said, it all happens in 3 streets.
It was so centralised.
It was so centralised. So we walked up and he said, oh, by the way, the gangsters all dressed the same. And I went, oh, yeah. And he said, they've got long black hair, tattoos of their gang on their forearm, 5 Ts, and they wear badly fitting microfiber suits and white shirts. Okay, so off we go. And now, as we're walking up and he's pointing out this, the murder happened there, that's a sleazy pool hall there, great restaurant there, of which there was many. Yeah. He said, we saw what I would suspect is a gangster at the side of my arm, and he saw him at the same time and he waved, Duck, hello, Duck, and Duck waved back and hello, sir. So we walked on over, and the detective then said, it was a young constable, not quite a detective, said, Duck, I'm glad I saw you. He said, I'm glad I saw you too, sir. He said, no, Duck, I'm glad I saw you because I've got to arrest you. Oh, what for? And at this stage, I'm thinking, I'm not prepared. Like, do we have our handcuffs? Do we? And he said, yes, Duck, I've got to arrest you for attempt murder. And I'm thinking, attempt murder? Like, where's our backup? Where's our plan? Yeah. And Duck said, which one? Which one? And he went, the one at the Mekong Club. And he went, I forget. Got cameras now. He goes, yeah, Doc, got you cold. And I'm thinking, okay, we're going to sort of, jump on him now and arrest him.
And drag him
anyway, the detective or the officer said, Doc, if you could be at the police station at 4:00, we're just going up to have lunch. And he said, oh, no worries, see you later, have nice lunch. And I said to the detective, are we going to duck around the back of the units and jump over the fence and attack him and jump on him and arrest him? He went, no, we're going to have lunch. I said, but attempt murder? He said, yeah. And I said, that's very serious. He said, oh, yeah, that's serious. Yeah, he's done a lot of really violent crimes. I said, so do you think we should arrest him? He said, yeah, 4:00. And I said, but he said, Deb, you're going to have to learn. I know it's your first day, but if we arrested every person today we saw who's attempted to kill someone, we'd never get lunch. So they will do it at 4:00. Yeah. And we had a beautiful lunch. And sure enough, at 4:00, called, there's a person in the foyer to see Detective Wallace, and I turned up and there's Duck. He said, sorry, I'm a bit early, you want me to come back? I said, no, it's fine. And he got 5 years. So, that's the way of the world.
It's amazing, but that is a cultural thing that dealing with Asian crime, and that's it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was typical.
It does not work in other areas, but it worked there. And I think you made the observation when you were there that the gangs, and they were fairly young, the 5T, and what did the 5T represent? Because it had a fairly heavy reputation.
Originally, they tell me that it came out of in prison camps, it was actually originally 4 Ts.
Yeah.
And they would put them on tattoo the forearm so that people in the prison camps would say they don't have family here, so we all need as a group to look after them.
Yeah.
So they got their, because most of the people could only afford to get their son. They usually picked a child within the family group, and it tended to be their young teenage son. So when they were in the prison camps, the others would look after them. And of course, when they came to Australia and they left the detention centres, a lot of these kids then didn't have family. So they bonded yet again together. By this stage, then they tell me for survival of the streets, they started to do the more simple crimes such as neck chain robberies was one of the first lot, that sort of stuff before they moved on to extortions. And then because they needed that, I suppose they learnt young, just like bikies do, they needed a reputation, so they changed the meanings of that word and they put a big T over the top, which I think they put their own spin was either revenge was the final T. So then they became the 5 Ts. They all had this on their forearm, the big T with 4 little Ts under it.
Right, okay. And also drug trade, the heroin in Cabramatta, that was rampant there.
Yeah.
To the point that was the go-to place for a lot of heroin junkies and that. They go to Cabramatta so they could get their hits.
Yeah, in a way, I think it's sad to say we were probably a victim of our own success because we worked really hard with it, because the original crimes they did was traditional bag snatching, neck chain robberies and extortions. And we worked really hard with the community to come to explain to them that extortion isn't security, it's actually a crime here. And we worked really hard to break those barriers and understand our laws. And they were very brave. They were very brave, those members of the community, to come forward. So we actually started to break the back on this, and we were locking them up. And I think, as any criminal group
was their own community reporting?
Yeah, it took a while because, and it was a turning point, was a lady, and she was the mother of one of the shop owners, and we said to them, she said they were being extorted, and I said, oh, you have to make a statement, and we go to court. She said, no, they come back. They said they'll come back and I'll tell you the boys, but I can't make a statement. And I said, but you have to make a statement because you have to go to court. No, they'll come back and kill my family because that's the threat. Yeah. So I said, well, it's really difficult for us to do that. So she said, all right. So she said, you get the boys and I will make a statement. So it was all a bit, so we got this, we did a lineup. We found it where they were, so did a line ready to go. In those days, you didn't have fancy cameras and behind screen. We just did, you had to actually walk past them. So we got a group and she said, no, I don't want the boy to see my face. And I thought, here's a nut, how are we going to do this? And she said, I'll point out the boy, but I can't see. So we're sitting there, how are we going to do this? And she's reached across and grabbed this old, we used to keep our drug exhibits in those days, like cannabis, in paper bags.
The big paper bag. Yep.
So she's grabbed it and she said, oh, it's easy. She grabbed the paper bag, punched 2 holes in it with a pen and put it on her head and said, let's go. And so we did.
Innovative.
And she identified the boy. Beautiful. And she was the first. And she said, we can't come to this country and live like we did in our old country. We have to stand up to the law. Right. So we did. So we broke the back a fair bit, and it was a bit like a revolving door at times because we had trouble with witnesses getting there, etc. Lots of fantastic support by the magistrates at Fairfield Court to help us through this. But then I think the gangsters sort of realised, hang on a minute, if victims keep telling the cops, we're going to keep going to jail. So maybe we do a crime that the victims won't tell the cops. So, of course, a ready market. So the heroin market sprang out. There was no victims really to speak of, and they could do the bidding of the upper line to sell. So, and it became known as the biggest street-level distribution centre in Australia, if not compared to the Southern Hemisphere, because of its purity, and the cost was half the price of the other traditional market, which was King's Cross.
Right, and that's why people were coming out to Cabramatta.
Yeah, the media helped a fair bit on that because we kept a lid on it until there was an article called the Smack Express, I think, turned out in 1995. And so people that maybe didn't know, because most of the customers were from Western suburbs who knew, but they didn't sort of sprout it. And suddenly all roads led to Cabramatta and the dam wall was breaking. Okay.
Now, they formed a mini gang squad within Cabramatta, and did you head that up?
Yeah, it was, and I thank, at the time he was Chief Superintendent Paul McKinnon, who then went on to run Sydney Olympics because he was the region commander. Yeah. And we talk about opportunities and we talk about milestones in careers, and this was mine because I was now a very junior sergeant running a sort of a small group of specialist officers called the Special Operations Group that service the region for break-in and steal, a bit like we have today. Yeah. And at the time we'd had John Newman in 94 got killed, and then we got to Tree Min Tran, the leader of that gang had been killed as well. Great support from our organised crime.
That John Newman, and that was a MP, serving MP that was murdered. So that certainly put the focus on Cabramatta.
Yeah, and Paul McKinnon, who was the region commander. What are you doing about this? Especially when, more so when, because the homicide squad under Nick Cowles were doing the Newman murder, that was all being locked away. But the gang stuff, when Tree Min Tran got murdered, everyone thought there's going to be carnage because they won't take this laying down. Yeah. I think at the time there was a strike force running called Strike Force Palm that was looking at that separately from the homicide squad, and we were doing the ground stuff, still the disruption stuff way back then. And my boss, I think, was under a fair bit of pressure because if this gang war breaks out, blah, blah. So he decided to set up, probably politically incorrect at the time, a Cabra-matta gang squad to address the gangs in Cabra-matta. And I think it was probably very brave of him to do that because I think that people would have preferred not to call it the Cabra-matta gang squad because now we've got gangs.
Didn't want to even identify the problem.
Yeah. And he asked me to head it up, which was a very and I said, so what's my job? And he said, dismantle that 5T gang, Wallace. I thought, that's going to be easy, not because we've been doing it for years, locking them up, but they're still there. So and also I didn't have detectives. I had what we call plainclothes police.
Junior police.
Yeah.
And you had a name there, didn't you, that the local crooks called you?
They probably had a few names they called me, but they called me, I knew Madam, and that they referred to.
Do you want to talk us how you got the name Madam? Like I've heard a lot of nicknames with the cops, and I haven't heard one of Madam. Yeah,
look, I think it was, I said to them, I hope it's not an age thing, and they said, no, it's respect, Madam, because it was a thing. But I remember then an author called Philip Cornford was wanting to do a newspaper article at the time on the gang. And I said, he said, I want access to them. I said, well, I don't talk to anybody anyway. I managed through some good faith I had with one of them to have a chat to him. He was in jail. And so he went out to the jail and I didn't know this part and he was talking to them. And then he came back to me and said, do you know what they call you? And I said, yeah, Madam. He went, oh, do you know the other one? I went, no, what other one? And he said they laugh, they call you the smiling assassin. I said, what do you mean by that? And he asked the gang member and he said, well, Madam, she puts us in the dock and as she's shutting the door, she always be friendly and she smiles and she says, this is hurting me more than it is you, but we know she doesn't mean it. We know she likes putting us in jail. So we call her the smiling assassin.
That's a pretty cool nickname to have as a cop.
Yeah, I think it's a bit...
You and reading your book, and it comes out in your book that you actually had some empathy for what the members of the gangs were going through because they enfranchised from their own country and not family support, and they were fairly young. Do you want to talk us through your feelings on that?
Yeah, it was, again, Paul McKinnon who came to me and said, again, I have these mentors in my life and role models who are men of very few words in a way. He just gave me a book, Wallace, read that. And it was Sun Tzu, The Art of War. And
that's an interesting book.
And I got from it at that early stage because it's pretty heavy, hard reading some ways through. But what I took from it was knowledge is power.
Know your enemy.
Know your enemy. And with that in mind, I went up to their coffee shop where they would sit every day, an outdoor coffee shop, and they didn't worry. They knew that we would walk past. It was the cops. So I went up, and often they would say, "Madam, you want a nice coffee?" And we'd sit there, and we'd talk over things or whatever. And on this particular day, Tree Min Tran had been murdered, so the gang was pretty well, as they said to me, "Madam, we're a snake without a head." At the moment. So they said, if you're going to I told them my new role. They laughed a bit because I said, I have to break you all up. They laughed and made a make funny joke.
And you're laughing while you're sitting there.
Yeah, they said, you have to do what, Madam? And I said, you have to not be a gang anymore, okay, because I have to look good. Yeah, and they said, oh, Madam, make funny joke.
So it's a completely different approach to what they'd be used to.
They did, and they said, they said, well, you're a little bit dumb, so we're going to help you. And this Sun Tzu thing came and they said, you have to understand us before you can beat us. And to do that, you have to understand where we came from. And they explained about the prison camps and how they were young teenagers. And yes, now they said we're machete-wielding killers. Yeah, we understand that. We're ruthless and all of that. But three things will happen to us, and that is that you will catch us and we'll go to jail. We accept that. We'll get killed, part of the life of being a criminal. Or we may just hang around long enough to grow up or grow out. The challenge isn't for you, though, because we'll give up on us. We're done for. We've got a whole generation of young ones sitting here, these young ones, who have no education and very little English skills, and they can't get into school. So the challenge for you is to not just cut the lawn, which you're trying to do. You need to use the weed killer, and you need to get from the grass, from the roots. Thought about it, went back and thought about it, thought over it.
Very philosophical.
They were.
Not the type of thing you would be expecting coming from your the kids in the gangs that you're after.
And rat cunning in many ways. Yeah. So I went back and they said, so what's the answer? I said, you need to get them into school. So I went to different, and I had a great relationship with the local schools. They were amazing. But they said, Deb, it's beyond us, because these kids don't speak English very well, and they're role models, and this is this traditional policing model or schooling model going to work. And I went through all of that. And then out of the blue, and it was my old boss, Cole Hilson, who was at Cabra-matta, his father-in-law worked with a priest as a volunteer called Father Chris Riley from Youth Off the Streets. Yeah. And he said he wants to meet you. And I remember our meeting, I thought, everyone wants to give me advice. So and I rang him and he said, I will come to you. Yeah. He came out and he looked pretty cool. He wore black denim jeans. He had a black shirt on. He had his collar and he had a cross in his ear, little earring. Okay, that's different he looks look. Pretty cool. And we got to talking and he said, I want to meet these guys. And I said, Father, due respect, they're not street youth. These are machete wielding. They've killed people.
They're gangsters.
They're gangsters. And he said, Deb, I've worked the streets of the Cross for years. Nothing phases me. And I don't know why I said it to him. We laughed years later. Can you lose the collar, Father? Like, I got a reputation here. I'm tough. I can't be seen working with a priest. And he's just looked at me and laughed and undid his collar. And we went up, met the guys, and they said, Madam, who's that? And I said, oh, he's a priest. And I said, he's Father Chris Ryder. They said, they couldn't quite understand. They said, he's your father. And I laughed because Chris is that much older than me. I said, no, he's a priest, like God. Oh, like God. And I said, like God. Oh. And they wiped this chair down and put him, they said, Father, sit please. And I'm going, hang on a minute, are you Buddhist? Like, what's going on here? What about me? Yeah. And then Father, Matt, in his way, said, I'm a registered school. If you're really serious, I'll be here 3 days a week, 3 hours on those days. She has to be here. Yep. Because I won't be here without her. And on those 3 hours, there is no crime. There is no drug sales and there is nothing, or I pack up. Yep. How committed are you older guys to the young ones? They said, we're committed. So we did that for over a year. And
just what an innovative approach to a problem that if you took it on the traditional way, it was just going to keep escalating and going at a problem like that. That's amazing.
I look back in hindsight and also talking to Paul McKinnon over the years, and I think, as you touched on before, being a woman in the cops, one would say, it had its disadvantages. Well, actually, it probably had its advantages because I wasn't bound.
A little bit differently.
You guys were bound by thinking really by that same way of thinking because, often cops would say, we are like for like, we're images of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
I was realistic. I wore, colourful clothes and skirts. Yeah, well,
you're not going to go there and physically intimidate them.
Couldn't do it. So I had to have my approach. And so I thought, do I get more with honey than I do vinegar? And isn't prevention better than cure? Father had been telling me about this, about disruption. And so I thought, let's have a go. What have we got to lose here? We still did. The gang squad was still running all their operations, heaps and heaps of operations on the non-3 hours, and we locked up heaps. But
it's interesting where you say prevention is better than cure, and the Western way of treating things after it's already occurred, but the Eastern way is more that very sane, the prevention rather than treating it after it's occurred, and maybe that's what tapped into the psychology of it.
Yeah, and we did get the results. I mean, Father ended up taking them, the 6 young ones, to his farms, and I kept track of them for some years. Well, dropped off now, of course, but not one of those young ones returned to crime or ever did crime. So
just rehashing this, because I think it's an amazing story. So you've got the gang, the upper level members of the gang, they're worried about the junior members of the gang. Yeah. You're trying to stop the gangs. Yeah. And then Father the Rileys come into the scene and you're running street schools. Yeah.
And basketball games on Friday nights. Yeah. And they were really good basketballers. They were only short. They kept playing basketball.
And they probably hadn't been shown that love or, just anyone caring for them.
Yeah. And they were in competition, and before long, Rotary Club was there cooking barbecues on Friday nights. Yeah. We had a Sega trailer for Sega games for the kids that the little ones who didn't want to play basketball. Yeah. We had the St John's ambulance set up. We did it right in the middle of Cabramatta. The council at first said, why don't we put you out at Wetherill Park? And Father said, no, you got to do it where their space is. So we rolled in portable basketball rings and set it up in the car park in the middle of Arthur Street, which is right in the middle of Cabramatta, and played basketball on Friday night.
That's policing at its best, isn't it? Engaging the community and working with the community.
I think we've got better doing that,
yeah.
thankfully. But and then so we had a bit of a bad time, and I suppose for me this was the start of a whole different chapter with some people that then were sort of trying to undermine me, I guess, is that they brought in an operation called Puccini, and I know the well-intentioned, I understand, but they thought if we flood the streets with uniform cops, then everything will go away. And so, but it was a very, very restrictive operation. So it was uniform cops from all over Sydney, not Cabra-matta, brought in en masse to walk.
I remember the times, and it almost, to me, it felt like a knee-jerk reaction to criticism in the media and some high-profile people attacking it. And, okay, as police, we're going to react to criticism and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, but the resilience of the gangs, what did they do? They moved. They were only allowed to walk 3 streets. What did the crooks do?
Yeah.
Went 4 streets into the residential areas and set up drug houses. First time we'd seen these things.
So how did that work coming in like that? Because you knew the community and you knew the people involved, and then externally other cops have come in that wouldn't have understood the community. So was that in conflict with what you were trying to achieve?
And didn't want to be there. Those cops didn't want to be there. They were like, you're seconded to go out there walking these streets of Cabra-matta. We had people from Northern Beaches. You can imagine walking the streets, patrolling the Corso. Suddenly you're out in Cabra-matta in summer. Yeah. So it was real. And what the community were concerned about, they then felt they were under like martial law. Like, why are all these cops? But no one's talking to us.
Because it was high visibility policing, wasn't it?
Yeah, and we had a really strong, under Alan Leake, a strong beat police. Yeah. But they would walk to the shop owners every day and chat to them and engage with them and laugh with them. And suddenly you got these cops walking 3 abreast down the street, no engagement with the community, no talking to shop owners, no eye contact. And what they would often then get complacent, and what the community told me they saw was, Madam, it's bad enough that these people don't talk to us, but now they look bored and they're not talking to the criminals. And so there was this, what's really going on? So one day we were doing school, and what we used to have in Cabramatta, we were one of the first to get it. We did some work. We went up to Brisbane to look at CCTV's footage or cameras that were first put in up there. And then we brought it to Fairfield City Council, put them in. They're fabulous, great tool for us. But we were very protective of the capacity because we don't want everyone to know that methodology thing, how good they were. And it was good we publicised that you were feel safe. We got you on the camera surveillance. But we went back after school, and some people from Puccini who went up to the kids were still doing school at their coffee shop, which is an outdoor coffee shop. And I needed that because I needed to be watched. The Royal Commission was around at that stage. I needed to be under camera the whole time because of the risk of what are you doing with these gangs. And they went up to the junior members and said, you got number 4 wrong. And it was maths. Yeah. And he said, how do you know, sir? And he said, I've been watching you on the cameras. We can see everything you did. To them, it was like, this was supposed to be a place of trust, and you betrayed us. So they rang and said, that's it, we're done. If you want to teach us school, you teach us in the pool hall.
So that's where you lost the kids?
Yeah, they wanted to go to the pool hall, and I can't go to the pool hall because it's closed. I can't be outside the cameras. And Father said, I'm not going without her. So we were trying to work our way through it about how we're going to do it. And the 3 of the kids who weren't real good at it did an armed robbery and had a gun. Anyway, they got caught straight away. They were at Lidcombe Children's Court, ready to go. I'm doing my gang squad stuff, and I get a call to say that the senior members of the 5T have just been pulled up. They're really angry. They're fiery. They're off to Lidcombe Children's Court. They're talking about getting their brothers out. We had nothing to hold them on. They're on their way to... So they called me and said they're on their way to Lidcombe Children's Court. They're fired up, and this one guy called Sartor, nickname called Sartor, he was the enforcer. That's called Killer. So I thought, we don't want this showdown. So I rang Father. He said, I'm on my way. I said, I'll meet you out there. We get there, and he's dealing with the courts, and I'm dealing with them outside. And they said, Madam, we've got to get them out. These boys have never done crime. They can't be in jail. They'll turn bad.
And this is a gang member saying to you.
But they're waving money at me. They said, Madam, we get them out thinking bail. Yeah. And I said, this is not going to work. You need to leave. Father will get them out to his farms, but you now have to walk away from them. Yeah. And we have to send them to the Southern Highlands to his farms. You have to walk away. It's up to you now. And they said, we'll walk away. And they walked away. Interestingly, there was a So father got them out on bail, and they went to the farms, and hence they got their school certificate and moved on to a crime-free life after that.
Isn't that's a beautiful, nice ending story that you can change lives that way.
Yeah.
You mentioned about internal affairs, and you're worried that there was some, I won't say criticism, but you were suspected of doing things. Yeah,
it was, and again, it was a bit of a shock because I'd been taught by Paul, and also this role model back at Cabramatta was the straightest. Thank God we withstood everything. We had this amazing, honest group of detectives amongst all the stuff that made it wasn't all the stuff that was going on, particularly at Northwest area, and that thing I did at the courts was the beginning because someone had seen me and didn't know who I was, but had done rightly so, had done an intelligence report, which is where they record things, and said that a woman in her late 20s, I was mid-30s, so I'll take that.
So you put
I was very flattered.
Oh, it must have been me.
Wearing a purple suit, which is what I was wearing, surprisingly enough, as I would.
Covert. You're good at a lot of things, but covert, no. I think,
And that she must have power over the gang, in fact, might be the new leader because they showed her respect. She directed them to leave, they did, and they gave her a wad of money. That was the wad of money, which they never gave me. They went back.
Yeah.
But that sort of maybe started, I don't know so that must have been enough perhaps to trigger the Royal Commission to think, what is this?
Yeah.
And it wasn't then until the Royal Commission, they were very bad at their surveillance, by the way, because they, as the gang member said, there's some funny detectives, madam, in town. I said, well, who are they? And they said, well, we don't know, madam, but they've got blow-dried hair, they've got jeans with creases, and they're wearing their wedding ring and their key ring on a belt, and we know
not
junkies don't have a car, and they would have hocked their wedding ring, and they don't iron their jeans.
Okay.
So they were still letting us know. It didn't worry us because we were just doing business as usual. The Royal Commission could be everywhere. I didn't care.
Pretty telling.
And of course, they went to. It wasn't until they went to the pool hall, and the gang member comes to the police station and said, "Madam, this man come and asked a lot of questions about you and give us his card and said we should ring him if we got anything to talk to him about you." And I said, what did he ask you? And he said, he asked us if we give you money. And we said, you think if we give her money, she'd buy a better car? Because I had a Camira with no paint on it.
Right.
So I panicked. And then I get a phone call and said, by the way, because I'm now thinking, I'm talking in my office, I'm talking to myself and going, what's this about? I get a phone call from the Royal Commission to say, we need to interview you. You're not to ring anybody. You're not to talk to anyone. We're going to meet you at a certain location. Yeah. I panicked. I probably broke every rule. I rang Paul McKinnon.
Yeah.
And he said, I told him what happened. I didn't know what to do. And he just said, leave it with me.
Yeah.
A few days later, I get another call to say, we don't need to meet with you, but we want you, because I'd had like McKinnon had said, record. So I recorded every interaction with every gang member on Intel Report. So there was heaps of them. Everything I did was transparent. And they didn't even know my role, that I was running this job. And they rang me and said, we don't need to see you, but we just want to tell you something. We just want you to watch your back. And I said, oh, don't worry, I'm not talking to another gang member as long as I exist. And they said, what do you think it was the gangs? I said, well, who else would say something like this?
Yeah.
And they said, no, just watch within. And I thought, what the hell? What is this? Yeah. So I said to Paul, I can't do this. And he was just going off now to run the Olympics, to get ready for the Olympics. And then I said, okay, we'll just go back to, I was still doing all the drug work in Cabramatta, which was immense. And before we do any operation, you have to do orders to explain what your operation's about and get approvals and all that. And there was a restaurant on the wrong side of the railway station, that not the western side was where all the Vietnamese ran, that was where all the customers went, and they were very generous and allowed the Cambodians or the Laotians to do the eastern side where there was no people got off the train.
No demarcation disputes.
And there was a restaurant, and it was a restaurant well known for not selling food, and there was a code, and you'd go in every day, and if you asked for a can of drink, you knew that you wanted to buy drugs, but you have to give the right can, otherwise they think you're a cop, so they didn't sell. So this was going on this particular day. We knew the can of drink, but I said to the guys, they every time we go in, there's no drugs, but we know they've been selling 20 minutes before. We worked out that the restaurant behind them had a rabbit run behind it, and as soon as they see us approach from that direction, which is the way we had to come, they'd run in and say they're on their way, and they'd ditch it. So I said, all right, I've got a plan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to distract the first restaurant, because I know who they are. I'll talk to them about their fire escapes or something. While I'm distracting them, they won't have a chance to go to the back. You guys, so it was all in orders, all done. So we did it, worked. For the first time, we got 4 ounces of heroin. The next day I get a call from the head of internal affairs and said, Deb, can you come and see me? Or Paul McKinnon had said, you're going to get a call. He's a good guy, go in and see him. So I went in, didn't know why. And he said to me, I'm going to show you a video and I want you to talk me through this. And it was the video of, again, from the CCTV footage, me going to the first restaurant, the boys going in. And I said, this is what happened. And he said, so what are you doing? I said, well, I'm distracting them so we got 4 ounces and I've got orders. I've done the orders. That's what so you've got orders? I said, yeah, it's all, no worries. And I said, no worries. I said, and I just knew then and a few weeks later I was given an opportunity which wasn't really planned to go and work as an acting relieving inspector at they were setting up a new internal affairs. Yeah.
It's interesting, a couple of points there that you said that you thought if there was going to be a complaint it would come from the crooks.
Yeah.
But you said internal and within. And I also know in your book at that particular point in time you had a bit of a profile because of the work that you were doing, and it was almost like it's disappointing that an organisation that can turn on you when you're doing good work and.
I wasn't asking. I was just doing my job, and I didn't. And I think too, Mr. McKinnon gave me that opportunity. Maybe people thought, why didn't I get it? And well, that's Paul saw something in me. Then he did say later on that exactly that I was counting on you to do something different. I thought you might just have a go, and it paid off.
No, well, it's you certainly made an impression there, and I'm just wondering with sliding door moments, if you were the head of the 5T gang, we could have a really interesting podcast going on about that.
Inside information.
Inside knowledge. So,
unfortunately, I was female and non-Vietnamese. I'm very strict about that.
Yeah, well, you always you change the landscape with outfits and that, so who knows? So you enjoyed that time, and in Cabramatta, you felt that you made a difference?
Loved it. It had a heartbeat. They were the best community, best cops. Loved it.
I can see how you're talking about it now. That you've still, it's left an indelible impression on you.
Yeah.
Father Riley too.
Yeah.
He didn't just pass into your life and pass out. That you've done similar type of things over in the UK or US and Philippines and East Timor? Yeah,
we became really, really close because I loved everything he was doing, so we kept that going, and I was lucky enough to then become part of his organisation. And
what's his organisation?
Oh, Youth Off the Streets.
Okay.
So I became a director for a little while, but his organisation was growing so much that it needed lots of time on a board of that size. So I said, Father, how about you be a priest, I be a cop, and we be best friends. And that worked out beautifully. Yeah. But some of the journeys we had together, he was given an amazing thing. In America, he was given this really amazing award in South Dakota by an Indian tribe called the Circle of Courage.
Right.
And he was, I loved it because we went to South Dakota for this great big awards night, and all I remember is him sitting on stage wrapped in an Indian blanket, and I know he hates stuff like this. He hates awards and he hates being centre of attention, and he had to sit there and it was fabulous. And then, of course, we travelled to, Father set up in a partnership with the priests in East Timor. He sort of adopted an orphanage in East Timor. So we would travel up just after the Indonesians had left. So what would probably be on a very short journey was done by 4-wheel drives, and I remember when we first went there, it was very raw, and there were still bandits in the mountains, and they said that the journey can be a bit perilous. So we had an escort of the priests came with us to take us there in these 4-wheel drives. And I remember there was a bit of commotion. I'm with Father in the car, and there was this commotion ahead, and sure enough, there's straight out of a movie, there's these bandits come out of the bush, and they look like Mexican bandits. They had bandanas, but they had like bullets all slung over their shoulders, and they're arguing up front with our guide, and I'm thinking, and I said, Father, there's only one thing for this if it gets really touchy. And he's looked at me, not knowing what I'm going to say next. I said, Father, this is a very Catholic country, and you're a priest. Yeah. He said, yes. I said, I think we need to sacrifice the priest. Get out. So he got out and he negotiated.
You're so courageous.
I said, I'm hiding back here with the rest.
You get out of the
Someone's got to look after the kids in the back. So we spent wonderful time there. And, of course, then we went over to the Philippines with Father Shay Cullen, who ran an organisation called the Prater Foundation, which is he would rescue kids being sold into sexual servitude, little kids. I'm talking little kids. And he'd take them to his foundation and he'd get them into schooling and then but offer their families, because their families would often give up the children because they were so poor, he would bring the families in to do industry like they did dried mangoes and create this whole environment where the families weren't poor anymore and could have their children. It was amazing.
Seeing people do work like that, like Father Riley and that, what we see in the cops, you lose a little bit of faith in humanity, but then you see people like that and they're inspiring, aren't they?
I think, Gaz, what we have to say is it's a bit like later on when we did the bikie stuff with the 1%. I like to think that criminals are the 1%, whether they're bikies or not. Yeah. And it's the 99% of why we do what we do, or what we did, was for the 99% of this wonderful community. And working in that volunteer stuff is, to me, and talking to those givers of time is inspiring. And you go, that's why I do it.
But I like the beauty of breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
Because you can see that cycle continuing and work like that you did with Father Riley and the stuff that you did at Cabramatta. It's so impressive. But you had internal investigations after you, so you decided to join them. Yeah,
and again, it wasn't necessarily where I ever saw myself. But I only stayed there. I didn't stay there very long. It was straight after the Royal Commission was folding up, and they set up this new group called Special Crime, which I didn't work up, and Internal Affairs, and I worked at Internal Affairs part. The commander was Mal Brammer, and so I worked there with again an amazing team. And I think we were doing
and Mal Brammer had a good reputation.
He did, and we had a great team, and we were doing a job that didn't really have. We found out we didn't really have any cops in it, and I remember Mal got me aside one day and said, "I don't think there's any cops in this." I said, "That's a good thing, isn't it? Isn't that to show that it's not intrinsic?" I said, "There's a big good group of cops. Some ex-cops are in it, like that, but not current cops, except for a few that are using drugs."
Were you involved in the shooting of the gentleman, the French artist at Bondi?
Ronnie Levy? No, what happened, that had already happened before I got there, and that was a separate investigation, done by the homicide squad. But what had happened is, it often happens, you stick your head above the trenches and someone will fire shots. And I think the two officers involved in that, Rodney Podesta and Tony Di Lorenzo, because they were known, people started bringing in information about, oh, by the way, do you know these cops are mixed up in drugs, et cetera, et cetera. So our job was to investigate their involvement and other police serving.
And that was drug using and supplying in the eastern suburbs with police involved?
Yeah, we never, certainly Tony wasn't charged with it, Tony Di Lorenzo, and I think they weren't involved in drug supply. They were part of that party scene, I'd say. Some of them, some cops, not Tony, but I think that eastern suburbs scene.
It was sort of a wake-up call, because the world had been changing, and we were getting everyone from society into the cops and the drug scene. Yeah. But that shooting, it was iconic, and I think it was because it was on Bondi Beach, and the images it sort of indelibly imprinted on people's minds that saw it. So Internal Affairs, from there, how long did you stay in Internal Affairs?
Just short of 2 years.
Right. Okay. I'm just looking at the time. I'm always mindful of the time, hence the clock sitting on the table.
I could talk your ears off.
Well, I've just got to make sure I rein you in. I want to say something on a personal thing, because it just goes to the type of person you are and to understand, because when we go into part 2, we're going to be talking about you taking on the Middle Eastern crime gangs, and you and your team, and you always give credit to the team that you work with and also the bikies. But just on a personal point of view, and we're allowed to talk about this because it's a podcast and I'm hosting the podcast. But when I left the cops, it wasn't in the best of circumstances. In fact, 3 months before I put my resignation in, powers that be decided to put me in a room, and I described it like a caged lion. I was put in a room without windows, and there was a doorway, and it was in a hallway just to humiliate me. And I had certain people, senior people, come past, some of which had snarled at me. I don't really understand what snarling at me was going to do, because they certainly weren't scaring me. Other people would pretend they didn't see me. But there was one particular senior officer that would come barging into the room and go, "Hello, love, how are you? Don't let the bastards break you." And that was you. And you did it so many times. And in fact, on one occasion, you actually brought in a painting for me of the Greek Isles, which I happened to be on holidays the year before. So you put that in the room. So when I'm sitting there for 3 months with no access to any investigations, just to be humiliated, I spent a lot of the time thinking of that painting that you gave me. And I thank you for it, Deb. But that's, I think, why in the next part that we're going to cover in I Catch Killers, about your work with the gang squad and also Middle Eastern, you brought humanity into the tough world of policing. And those simple little gestures that you gave to me, I can't thank you enough for it. Seriously.
Oh, Gaz, I'd walk past and, and I always think no matter, what people have done, and in those days, I kept completely out of the politics of it because I just didn't want to get involved in anything. But I saw you sitting in this room, and most detectives will have files and pictures and things stuck on walls, and you're in this bunker, and I thought, well, I don't know the background of this. I don't really want to know, but I just know that no one deserves. Yeah. What if I was in your shoes and hey, for the grace of God, go away, anything could. So I thought, here, take this picture of Santorini. I don't know if I was, and put that there and just look at that. But I do remember something you said to me one day because you said, I'm staying, and I walked past and you said to me, every time I see you, I think you're going to bring Raptor to do an extraction.
Oh, yes, that's right. Because I forgot. There was another great leader that decided that I should be moved from that and put out the front of his desk. I hadn't been put out the front of the teacher's desk since I was 5 years old in kindergarten. And, I did see you. I thought, oh, right, you're going to bring the Raptor crew in, are you? And to move me on.
No, it was just photos of Santorini, mate. Not as good as the real thing, but maybe it helped.
No, it did help. So let's have a break, get another drink, and be back shortly. Thanks, Deb.
Gaz.
This podcast series is brought to you by True Crime Australia. Visit icatchkillers.com.au for additional material such as articles on what you heard, videos and galleries. You can search for the I Catch Killers with Gary Jubilant official group on Facebook and join in with discussion. See you for the next episode of the podcast.